The NFL is about a third of the way through the season, and a lot has taken place in a short amount of time. There are no more undefeated teams as we get closer to the middle of October, and there is only one team without a win, and that of course is the New York Jets. And some players are off to very hot starts, as Jared Goff picked up where he left off in the 2024 regular season, and he is currently on pace to throw for 41 touchdowns to just 7 interceptions. And Rams receiver Puka Nacua has also had a tremendous start to the year, as he has 588 receiving yards in 5 games and has 4 games with 10 plus receptions to start the year. And given that we are about a third of the way through the NFL season, we are going to break down the biggest realities of the 2025 NFL season so far. We're going to break down some of the highs and lows we've seen through the first 5 weeks and what to make of it pertaining to the rest of the year. There will also be a few more things mentioned at the end, and there is a lot to break down in today's video, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing how bad the Ravens defense is in 2025. The Ravens defense has allowed 177 points in the first 5 games of the year, and they've allowed 400 yards in 3 games too. The only times they didn't allow 400 yards was against the Browns in week 2, who have their own problems offensively, and to the Chiefs in week 4, who were up 37-13 with 13 minutes left in the fourth quarter. And even within the Chiefs game, they still allowed 382 total yards. The Ravens are 31st in yards allowed per game, 30th in passing yards allowed per game, and 29th in rushing yards allowed per game, and obviously injuries play a part in this, but allowing 37 or more points in 4 of 5 games is not a coincidence. And whenever you watch the Ravens defense play, you'll see not just once, but multiple times per game where guys' hands are in the air because they have no idea what's going on. And to prove this even further, there was a tweet from Jonas Schaefer of the Baltimore Banner that said Jair Alexander indicated that safety Malachi Starks was helping with the defense's communication when he was on the field, and that he wasn't sure whether the Ravens moved the green dot from Teddy Buchanan to Starks mid-game, but Jair seemed to think Starks was in charge. And look, injuries are one thing. Losing Nnamdi Madubuike for the year is an issue, and we've covered this on the channel several times, but we're talking about players on the Ravens defense not knowing who is calling the plays defensively pre-snap. And hypothetically, imagine a safety thinking the defense is calling a double safety blitz pre-snap, while the corner thinks they're in standard cover 2, leaving the back end of the defense completely wide open. These are day one things, and these are also things that should not be a problem in college, let alone at the professional level. Per Sumer Sports, the Ravens are also one of the worst teams at generating pressures, as they have a pressure rate of just 34.3%, which ranks 25th out of 32 teams and is nearly 4% below the league average of 38.1%. Their sack rate is also dead last at just 2.9%, as they've managed just 6 sacks on 207 dropbacks, while the league average, again, the league average, not the top team in the NFL, is 6.03%. And for your team to be less than half of the league average generating sacks while allowing as many points as they do, well, you have the 2025 Baltimore Ravens. And in the midst of making this video, the Ravens actually traded Odafe Oweh to the Chargers, who, as you can guess by the team's bad pass rushing numbers, was not having a great year, as he had just 12 pressures on 122 pass rushing snaps. And we will discuss rebuilding plans for teams coming up and throughout the next couple of months, and the Ravens are going to be a very interesting team to discuss, because obviously they're not like other one-win teams across the NFL, and this will very much be a retool rather than a complete rebuild. But one of the biggest realities of the NFL through the first third of the year is how un-Raven-like this defense is. And the Ravens have a favorable stretch of games after their Week 7 bye, as they play the Bears, Dolphins, Vikings, Browns, and Jets in their first 5 games off the bye. And no disrespect to Bears or Vikings fans there, it's just you never know which team you're going to get when you play those teams, but the Ravens are not done by any means. They're not for sure going to miss the playoffs, and if there is a hot take in this video, it's that I think the Ravens' playoff chances are very much alive pertaining to the 2025 season. Now, I don't think their Super Bowl chances are alive, and that's a completely different discussion, but it's not a coincidence this team has played as bad as they have through 5 games. And while I think the Ravens can win some games down the stretch, I don't think it's going to amount to anything because of how they play against the big dogs when it matters. And I think there's a very real reality that defensive coordinator Zach Orr is let go at season's end. The next big reality about a third of the way through the year is that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are very much here and that Baker Mayfield is in the MVP conversation. Now, the MVP conversation can obviously change significantly between now and Week 18, but Baker Mayfield is playing at another level this year. And in 2024, last year with the Liam Cohen and Baker Mayfield Bucs, one of my biggest concerns was that the Bucs were going to turn the ball over at the wrong time. And that was one of the biggest reasons I was never a full true believer in the Bucs last year. And they also started off very slow, so credit to the Bucs for finishing the year the way they did last year. But I always thought in the back of my head that they're either going to go into the Link or go into Ford Field with the season on the line, and it's going to be late in the game, and Baker's going to throw a bad interception because he's going to be very late on a read. And whether that was Vic Fangio baiting him with an interception late in the game, that was always my worst fear for the Bucs last year. And it didn't get to that point because they lost in the wildcard round to the Jaden Daniels-led Washington Commanders. But in 2025, Baker Mayfield looks like a completely different player. He is playing at a very high level. And I will be honest, back in week 1, for anybody who really thoroughly follows the channel, I did say that I thought Baker was really late on some reads in the Atlanta game, and I do stand by that. But over the past 4 weeks going through the tape, he has played a lot better and obviously played a tremendous game in Seattle in week 5 as Tampa won 38-35 in what was one of the better games of Baker Mayfield's career. Now, another player I want to highlight that I think is very much here for just being 5 games into his career, and a player that I think could win the Offensive Rookie of the Year, is Emeka Egbuka. And I don't think it's unrealistic to think that Baker and Egbuka could be in Tampa for not just a year or 2, but maybe the next 4 or 5 years, depending on how everything goes. Now, Egbuka was running what's called a bang 8 route against the Seahawks in week 5 on the big 57-yard play, and it's the subtle head fakes and the football IQ that gets Egbuka open, and he really starts the route and he really eats up as much space as he can against Josh Jobe in space here. And whenever he looks like he's about to break it for an out route, he lets off the accelerator just enough to get Josh Jobe to bite on the fake, also gives a head fake to the left, and then immediately turns on the accelerator to go back to the deep part of the route, and in the process of that creates enough separation for Baker to be able to hit him on a deep ball. And those types of route instincts and that type of football IQ is not something you see for a rookie. And obviously Egbuka is not a Tyreek Hill type player where he has 4.2 jetpack speed and he's not going to change the game in that type of way. That's not who he is as a player. But for him to have this type of football IQ and to display this on a week-to-week basis this early in his career, I'm not going to say who he kind of reminds me of as a young player, Justin Jefferson, but he's a really good football player. And quite honestly, with how the rest of the rookie class is and the situation that Cam Ward is in Nashville, I would be pretty surprised if Egbuka doesn't win the Rookie of the Year award. And from one high-powered offense to another, we go to Detroit to discuss the Lions. And after the Week 1 game against the Packers, there were a lot of overreactions. And even within the 2025 Lions team preview, I had several comments after that specific game. You have no idea what you're talking about. The Lions are back to the same old Lions. And guys, the Lions are fine. Darryl Johnston and Emmitt Smith played together for the Cowboys for well over 100 games back in the 90s. And Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery tied a record that they had, which was a teammate or running backs scoring in 14 games together. And I know Darryl Johnston was a fullback, but backs scoring in the same game for a 14th time is what the Lions and David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs achieved this past week. And Jahmyr Gibbs has played 37 career games. Whenever this offense is clicking, they're on another level. Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery each have 300 plus rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns to start the 2025 season. Amon-Ra St. Brown is leading the NFL in receiving touchdowns. And even within all of this, Jameson Williams has just 11 receptions on 21 targets. So for the Lions to have 4 straight games of 34 plus points, while Jameson Williams is still kind of getting, phased into the offense because he had the one big 100-yard game and has kind of been a non-factor outside of that. Now, you obviously have to account for Jamo's speed on every single play. So if you want to say he's been a factor in that part of the game, by all means, go for it. But he has 11 receptions on the season, and he was just paid over $25 million per year, and they didn't pay him over $25 million per year to have 11 receptions in 5 games. So for the Lions to have 34 plus points in each of their last 4 games with, again, a $25 plus million receiver in a lot of ways being a non-factor, well, the Lions offense is just getting started and they are very much back. And remember, the 2024 Lions finished as a top 15 offense in NFL history in terms of points per game, and the 2025 Lions, even despite having a 13-point outing against the Packers back in week 1, well, they're averaging even more points in 2025 than they did in 2024. So for everyone who enjoyed those jokes back in week 1 that the Packers were going to run the NFC North, and by the way, I did say that the Packers had a Super Bowl caliber defense. I never wavered in my faith with the Lions, so both things can be true. I still very much believed in both teams. The Lions are still very much here, and they are an absolute juggernaut offensively. Sam Darnold is also playing at a really high level, and I think there's a chance that the Seahawks have their quarterback for not just a year or two, but the next several years. And we'll see how this plays out as we're only 5 games in, but the Darnold to Smith-Njigba connection looks awesome, and they've also done a really good job of spreading the ball around offensively outside of the Week 1 game, in which there were a lot of screens, and that was a very poor game plan from Clint Kubiak, but Seattle has done a really good job since, and again, there's a chance that Sam Darnold is the guy in the Emerald City for the next several years. Now, this also applies to the Lions offense, but if Sam Darnold lays an egg in week 18 or the wildcard round again this year, then I have no control over that, but based on what we've seen in the first 5 games, Sam Darnold is playing at a very high level, and again, if the Lions have 5 turnovers in a playoff game, we can't exactly control that, but based on the sample size we've seen so far, both the Seahawks and Lions offense, and especially the Lions offense, are here to stay. The Cincinnati Bengals are up, and after starting 2-0, they've lost 3 straight games, which were to the Vikings, Broncos, and most recently, the Lions. And admittedly, after watching this team play against the Vikings and Broncos with Jake Browning, and after watching them get outscored 76-13 in a 2-week span, I and a lot of people, especially the folks in southwestern Ohio who may be watching this video with a cup of Skyline chili in hand, definitely thought the season was over. And within this 2-week span, because Vikings corner Isaiah Rodgers had 2 defensive touchdowns against the Bengals in week 3, the Bengals offense was actually outscored by the Vikings and Broncos defenses 14-13. And I know they lost to the Lions by double digits, and there was a point where it was 28-3, but the Bengals battled back and made the score look presentable, and Jake Browning threw 3 fourth-quarter touchdowns in week 5 against the Lions. But the biggest reality with this team is, whether they're quarterbacked by Jake Browning, Joe Burrow, or the newest Bengal, Joe Flacco, this team isn't going anywhere unless they seriously commit to building around Joe Burrow and investing in the team the way a team like the Eagles have with Jalen Hurts over the last few years. And I don't mean just Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Chase Brown, who I think is a solid running back, has 160 rushing yards on the season in 5 games on 65 carries for an average of just 2.5 yards per attempt. The Bengals are the 3rd worst team in the NFL in pass protection, as their pressure rate is above 44%, which is only better than the Giants and Jets, and the Jets is a little skewed because of how much Justin Fields hangs onto the football, and given the fact that Justin Fields has had one of the longest average times to throw throughout his entire career. And Joe Burrow definitely does that at times, and that's not to say Joe Burrow is Justin Fields in the pocket. Please do not take it that way, because that's not what I'm saying at all, but it's not a coincidence the Bengals are also 31st in average yards per carry as an offense, averaging just 3.1 yards. And what is one of the most frustrating things about the 2025 Bengals is they had their top 4 players take up over 42% of the salary cap, and whenever one of those players goes down with injury, well, in a lot of ways, you're done. And my biggest concern with this team heading into the season was how the offensive line would fare in 2025, and this is not me victory lapping a Joe Burrow injury because of how bad the offensive line has been this year, because remember, the Bengals had just 7 yards in the second half back in week 1 against Cleveland with Joe Burrow as the quarterback. But what I am saying is Joe Burrow will turn 29 in December, and the best shot this team had at a Super Bowl was 4 years ago, and the Bengals decided to let several key players from that team walk in free agency, most notably safety Jesse Bates. And while winning a Super Bowl isn't easy, obviously, time and time again the Bengals make it more difficult on themselves when they don't need to. And this isn't just exclusive to the offensive line and basically saying the Bengals are trying to get Joe Burrow killed, because the rest of the team outside of a few players isn't great either. Their third down conversion rate is above 49% defensively, which is 29th in the NFL, and their red zone touchdown percentage allowed is 72%, which is also 29th in the NFL. And again, Joe Burrow will only be 29 in December, but it's alarming how unprepared this team looks at times under Zach Taylor, and that's a direct reflection on coaching. There's times where the Bengals look disinterested, and I know they traded for Joe Flacco, but I don't think that's going to significantly change anything. I don't think anybody thinks that's going to significantly change anything. And the big connection between Dan Marino and Joe Burrow, while admittedly early to say with Joe Burrow, you can at least understand why people connect the two. The next reality of the 2025 season involves the Minnesota Vikings, and it's that nobody knows anything. This team is 3-2 through 5 games with losses to the Falcons and Steelers, and their hopeful franchise quarterback in J.J. McCarthy has only played 2 games as he sustained a sprained ankle against the Falcons in Week 2 and missed the Bengals game, the Steelers game, and the Browns game in Weeks 3 through 5. And the reason that we say nobody knows anything pertaining to the Minnesota Vikings is because this team has had significant injuries all throughout the 2025 season, yet they still have a winning record. Now, within the first 8 quarters of the season, the first 2 games, the Vikings offense for 7 of those 8 quarters looked abysmal. It was awful to sit through, and I very much sat through that Falcons game in Week 2 and thought, I cannot wait for this game to be over because of how painful it was to watch. And in Weeks 3 through 5, Kevin O'Connell did a much better job of having it be a quarterback-friendly offense, and especially in Week 5 against the Browns. And I was critical of Kevin O'Connell for calling the long developing passing plays against the Falcons, and I questioned entering Week 3, not that I questioned Kevin O'Connell's football intelligence, obviously, but I questioned why were the Vikings not calling quick passing plays for a young quarterback who had not played a competitive game since the 2024 National Championship. And in Week 5, with Carson Wentz at quarterback, they did a much better job of that, and they also had to do that as they had multiple offensive line starters out, and that was also against the big bad Myles Garrett. And the big bad Myles Garrett was a relative non-factor within the Week 5 game because of how fast Carson Wentz was getting the ball out. And again, this was with 3 out of 5 offensive linemen out, and J.J. McCarthy in the first 2 games of the season did not play with Christian Darrisaw, who is a franchise left tackle, and he also didn't play with Jordan Addison, who is a really good wide receiver too. And whenever your young quarterback does not have a franchise left tackle and has a liability at left tackle in Justin Skule, who played there for the first 2 games, as well as without his wide receiver too, well, you're going to have mixed results. And the game planning again in Weeks 1 and 2 was not great from Kevin O'Connell, and we've seen that significantly change in Weeks 3 through 5. And again, I thought O'Connell did a tremendous job in Week 5 against the Browns. Now, how all of this ties into nobody knows anything about the Vikings is this team has not played close to a healthy game in 2025, and even on the defensive side of the football, Andrew Van Ginkel and Blake Cashman, who are arguably the 2 most important pieces in Brian Flores' defense, have not been on the field for most of the 2025 season. Now, if people want to get their jokes in and say, hey, I know how the Viking season is going to end, and that you would be purple as well if you've been choking for over 50 years, and that SKULL is actually an acronym for still keep on losing, by all means get your jokes in, but to definitively write this team off with a team that's been improving over the past couple of weeks offensively with a backup quarterback, and by improving I mean from a play calling standpoint, with a hopeful franchise quarterback coming back, although JJ did not look good in the first 2 games admittedly, but the play calling also wasn't there, I think it would be a little ridiculous to completely write this team off and to say that, hey, they are absolutely not going to win any more than 6 games, there is 0 chance they make the playoffs, especially for a team that has not been close to healthy for 1 single game in the 2025 season. I think this concept also applies to the Chargers as well, who are 3-2 after starting their season 3-0 with wins over the Chiefs, Raiders, and Broncos. And to start your season 3-0 with 3 division wins, especially one over the 3-time defending conference champion Chiefs in a game where Justin Herbert threw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, and then to eventually follow that up with back-to-back division wins, and then to look very bad against the Giants and Commanders, well, I don't think anybody can definitively say anything about the Chargers. And by the way, the Super Bowl thing about the Chargers that we said about the Vikings also applies, because you can definitively say, hey, I don't think the Jets are going to win the Super Bowl this year at 0-5. Riveting take, brother. Keep it up. My point here with the Chargers is whenever this team is peaking, they are one of the top teams in the AFC. Now, I don't know about the top team, or I don't know about a Super Bowl caliber team, but like we saw in Week 1, this is a very good team. And even though they lost to the Giants in Week 4 with a score of 21-18, I would say it was more of the Chargers beating themselves than a true, hey, hey, the Giants really took it to him in week 4. Now, week 5 was a different story as the Commanders played an outstanding game, and a big shout out to Bill Krosky-Merritt for playing the way that he did. And even within the 2 interceptions Justin Herbert threw against the Giants, one was on a tipped ball by a defensive lineman that Dexter Lawrence caught and returned for 30+ yards. And Dexter Lawrence is a Hall of Fame talent, and if he stays healthy and plays at the level that he is for a couple of more years, he's going to be a gold jacket player. Gold jacket players make gold jacket plays. Credit to Sexy Dexy where it's due. But the second interception was kind of a laughable play. The way that it worked out was because it was a pick play by the Chargers, and whenever teams call rubbing routes at the line of scrimmage, a lot of the time they will have a bunch formation and they'll have somebody run a slant route and they'll purposefully go really slow off the line of scrimmage. That way they can have a clean release by the receiver in the back to run a wheel route so that they don't have to worry about them getting bumped at the line by a press corner, and that way they can have a clean release and be sprinting upfield and that the corner's already at disadvantage. But Tyler Conklin in the middle of the field set about as close to an NBA pick as you're ever going to have. I mean, he really put his feet down, planted in the middle of the field, had the broad shoulders and everything, and unfortunately Ladd McConkey fell in the process of this, and the play on the broadcast looked really bad because it was an interception right to the Giants corner, and then it was returned over 50 yards. And those 2 interceptions in a game the Chargers lost by 3 are the difference between the Chargers being 3-2 and 4-1 entering week 6. Now, again, like we said, the Commanders definitively went into SoFi and kicked their rear end, but the Chargers were also without Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt, and I think that there needs to be some context applied to that Commanders game, specifically with the offensive linemen that the Chargers had out, especially 2 Pro Bowl caliber offensive linemen. But to definitively sit here and say, hey, I know the Chargers are going to Charger, Justin Herbert is going to be a postseason choke artist, we saw the way that he played against the Texans last year, I don't think you can say that entering week 6. But that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe as we are closing in on 215,000 subscribers, and I cannot thank you guys enough for the support. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.